Well, we are in chapters 38 through 41 tonight of Job. We've bitten off some really big chunks as we've gone through this series. And a lot of it has been almost like going to a play and seeing actors act out scenes. Because there's been a lot of dialogue, to be honest with you. The last 6 weeks, we've observed the story of Job. We've got this whole story is just kind of astounding to go back and really look at, especially after all the dialogue, and look at everything that happened. We've been through his testing. We've listened to his lamenting. We've listened to his unkind friend's words, and even a new friend who was closer to the truth, but still not exactly in a place to speak for the Lord. Remember in the beginning that Satan wanted to test Job. 2 different times God allowed Satan to test Job, to bring afflictions on him. And his whole goal, and I would say this is his whole goal with you and me, is that he wants to test us to the point where we just curse God and give up and walk away. And Job never gave in to that. Never gave in to it. Even when his 3 friends, who were not at all helpful, came on the scene to comfort him. Job did get out of line a little bit. He turned from his lamenting and just not knowing what to do with the situation and turned to look at God and said, this has got to be your fault because I've done nothing wrong. And he kind of placed himself in a little bit of a place of arrogance. I don't know if you can relate to that. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you kind of hit a wall in your life with some trials or some sufferings. And you feel like you've done everything you can do and you just don't know what else to do. And you start to question the goodness of God. To the point to where you find yourself wanting to demand answers from the Lord. I've been challenged this whole time to really be honest with ourselves, to ask ourselves the truth. Have you ever shaken your fists at God and demanded an answer, full of arrogance and pride? Have we ever looked at our circumstances and blamed God for what happened to us? Have we ever felt like Job in his desire to state his case before God for what had happened to us? Have we ever felt like Job, just wanting an answer? Surely, if I could just talk to God and get an audience with him, I could state my case and he would give me some answers. Have you ever, you don't have to raise your hand. You ever feel that way? Have you ever been in that place? How many of you have ever thought in the midst of your trial and suffering, where is God? Is he just sitting back doing nothing? Does he even care about what I'm going through? In chapters 38 through 41, this is so different from the rest of this book because God lays everything out. He puts everything in perspective. In our modern day lingo, we might say, and then God showed up. You ever hear anybody say that? It gets used a lot. What's interesting is God's always been there, right? One of his traits, one of his characteristics is that he's omnipresent. He's everywhere at all times in every situation. So, in the moments where we might find ourselves going, God, where are you? Have you abandoned me? I think that's really the key. It's not that he's not out there existing. It's that he seems to have abandoned us. God lays it out. And he's very bold and blunt. I'm going to do a lot of reading tonight. And I feel like I need to read a lot because these are God's words. Not that the rest of the Bible isn't God's word, but this is God coming on the scene and speaking to Job. It's not the only time we see God come on in this way. It says in verse 1 of chapter 38 that he answered Job out of a whirlwind. Isaiah experienced this. Ezekiel experienced this. Jeremiah experienced this. It talks about him speaking from a whirlwind in the Psalms. And so I want to read here, and I want us to just take it in. Because as we read these words, if we've ever been in a situation in our lives where we found ourselves questioning him, questioning his goodness, questioning, do you even care about me? These words are very sobering. These words put into perspective that He's God and we're not. We should put everything in perspective. Let's read here in chapter 38. I'm going to try and read fast so we can get through all of this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read some very important parts. It says, Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measures? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the seas with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band? And prescribed limits for it and set bars and doors and said, Thus far shall you come and no farther. And here shall your proud waves be stayed. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal, and its features stand out like a garment. For the wicked their light is withheld, and their uplifted arm is broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare, for you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And where is the place of darkness, that you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the paths to its home? You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. It's just proof that God, I believe He's using a little sarcasm here. I like to think that. Maybe that's out of line. Maybe that's just reading into it. Maybe it's being funny. But He's using these examples, and I feel like there's a little sting to them anyway. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? There He's speaking to the 100-pound hailstones in Revelation that will come down and crush people. Just thought I'd point that out. What is the way to the place where the light is distributed, or where the east wind is scattered upon the earth? Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and the way of the thunderbolt, to bring rain on a land where no man is, in the desert in which there is no man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, to make the ground sprout with grass? Has the rain a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew? For whose womb did the ice come forth, and who has given birth to the frost of heaven? The waters come hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Can you bind the chains of Pleiades, or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season? Or can you guide the bear and his children? He's talking about constellations here. Do you know the ordinance of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings, that they may go and say to you, Here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inner parts, or given understanding to the mind? Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Or who can tilt the waterskins of the heavens when the dust runs into a mass and the clods stick fast together? He's confronting Job here to say, I created all of this. Where were you? Where were you? It's sobering to read these words, is it not? And he turns the page now here at the end of chapter 38 going into 39, and he starts speaking about the animal kingdom. And this is an area that I omitted some of them. I'd encourage you to go back and read the whole thing because it's so intricate in detail. He looks to all these particular animals and says, this is how I designed them. I designed them. And what did you do? You're actually one of the created. So here in verse 39, chapter 38, it says, can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens and lie in wait in their thicket? Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God for help and wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goat gives birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Can you number the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth? When they crouch, bring forth their offspring, and are delivered of their young? Their young ones become strong. They grow up in the open. They go out and do not return to them. Who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift donkey? To whom I give the arid plain for his home, and the salt land for his dwelling place. He scorns the tumult of the city. He hears not the shouts of the driver. He ranges the mountains as his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? I don't know about you. I'm thinking baby Jesus in the manger. I don't know if that's what he meant, but that struck my attention. Skip down to verse 19. Do you give the horse his might? This might get some of your attention, you horse people. You ever wonder why they don't ride into battle on camels? Some really cool details here. Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrifying. He paws in the valley and exults in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. He does not turn back from the sword. Upon him rattle the quiver, the flashing spear, and the javelin. With fierceness and rage he swallows the ground. He cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. When the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha!" He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. God made horses to be taken into war. Isn't that amazing? Chapter 40, there's a bit of a turn. God stops again and he confronts Job. And the Lord said to Job, "Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty?" Oh, I don't know about you, but it's like, I don't know if I ever really want to question God again. I'm sure in my sinful nature it might happen again. But you read something like that and it just puts everything in perspective. Should the fault finder, and here we are trying to find fault in God. Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. That phrase there at the beginning, shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Job, speaking from what he felt to be his God-absent agony, longed to contend with God. Yet after God appeared in his love and glory, Job now felt humbled about his previous demand. He rightly felt he was in no place to contend with the Almighty, much less to correct him and rebuke him. We might say that Job and God had a good time. I don't know about you, but if God showed up and says, "Let me tell you about all the things that I've done," there would be a time of kind of intimidation, like, man, but you would kind of clip over in this, man, God is amazing. I mean, nothing compares to him. He's God, and what am I? God taught Job all about his greatness using the whole world as his classroom. Yet in it all, God remained God, and Job remained man. In verse 3, we hear Job's response, and I think it's a fitting response. We will notice that his tone changes. And then Job answered the Lord and said, "Behold, I am of small account." If you're reading in a King James Version, some of those will say, "I am a vile man." And the reason that I like this translation is because vile then is not what the word vile that we know now. We think vile and we think he's a crooked, despicable person. He's an immoral man. And this is not about morality. And he says, "I am of small account." He's realizing in perspective who he is and what his standing is before God. What shall I answer you, he says. I lay my hand on my mouth. In other words, I'm going to shut up now. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but I will proceed no further. The different tone was not because Job's circumstances had substantially changed. God didn't cure Job. Nothing had changed. He's still sitting in a pile of ash with sores from head to foot with a piece of pot scraping the scabs. It's a great picture. That had not changed. He was still in misery and had lost virtually everything. The tone changed because while he once felt that God had forsaken him, now he felt and knew that God was with him. Anybody ever surprised you? Like you didn't really realize they were there, but they just started talking to you, and I was like, whoa. That had to have been what it was like with Job. All of a sudden, God's speaking, and it's like, I thought you'd abandoned me. Job also spoke with a completely different tone than he had with his companions. It was Job's turn to speak again, but there would be no long speeches, no more rage, no more challenging his Creator. The master is come, and the servant who had contended with his fellows takes a lowly stance of humility and silence. Behold, that word behold, he's astonished. He's coming to the realization abruptly of the stature of his status. I am of small account. Quiet, quite literally, it means of low weight. Job did not here in the presence of the majesty of God confess moral perversity, but comparative insignificance. All the arguing with Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar and Elihu could not bring Job to this place. Only the revelation of God could so humble Job and set him on his right place before the Lord. Job made his strong and sometimes outrageous statements when he felt to the core of his soul that the Lord had forsaken him. And now, with his sense of presence, the presence of the Lord restored, Job could better see his proper place before God. God's going to shift gears here. He's challenging Job, but then he's going to talk about Behemoth and Leviathan. These two characters that if you're familiar with the book of Job, there's a lot of controversy on what these creatures are. And to be honest with you, I don't know. There's a lot of speculation that Behemoth is a hippopotamus. It kind of makes sense. Some people think he's an elephant. On Leviathan, I would say it's probably a prehistoric dinosaur or some sort of dragon is what God is describing here. Bottom line is God created them. But I believe that he's using some symbolism in this to not just talk about how great and dangerous and overwhelming these creatures are for anyone to stand in front of, but I believe Leviathan has direct links to Satan in his descriptions. So let's read this and unpack it a little bit. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me, that you may be in the right? Have you an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with majesty and dignity. Clothe yourself with glory and splendor. Pour out the overflowings of your anger, and look on everyone who is proud and abase him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them all in the dust together. Bind their faces in the world below. Then I will also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can save you." What God's saying here is, can you do what I do? And, prove it to me, and then I'll show you that your right hand can save you. He's put him in his place, and I have to say it a pretty loving way. After go back and read Job's, if you want to. Go back and read Job's statements. They're long, and they're pretty agonizing. to hear about what he's going through here. God is saying to Job, you go ahead, do everything that I've done, and we'll see if you can match up here. God has continued to confront Job with the fact that he is man and God is God. Verse 15, we're going to pick up with the behemoth. Behold, behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. For the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plants he lies, in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. For his shade as a lotus tree covers him. The willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident though the Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can one take him by the eyes or pierce his nose with a snare? Chapter 41. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas with you? Will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you to take him for your servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or put him on a leash for your girls? Which I thought was just random. I mean, he did have 3 daughters, so anyway. Will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hands on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, the hope of a man is false. He is laid low, even at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to stir him up. How then is he who can stand before me, who has first given to me, that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs, or his mighty strength, or his goodly frame. Who can strip off his outer garment? Who would come near him with a bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth is terror. His back is made of rows of shields, shut up closely as with a seal. One is so near to another that no air can become between them. They are joined one to another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. His sneezes flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. Sounds just like a dragon. This last part, I believe, points more toward him referring to this creature Leviathan as a symbol of the devil. We know from Revelation that the devil is depicted as the great dragon. So I think it makes sense. In his neck abides strength, and terror dances before him. The folds of his neck stick together, firmly cast on him and immovable. His heart is hard as stone, hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. At the crashes they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it does not avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He counts iron as straw, the bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. For him, sling stones are turned to stubble. Clubs are counted as stubble. He laughs at the rattle of javelins. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot, makes the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him he leaves a shining wake. One would think the deep to be white-haired. On earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. He sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. That last line. He is king over all the sons of pride. Every angel that followed Satan's lead was cast out of heaven. God called Job to consider these unconquerable beasts, who each in their own way were examples of Satan and his power. In this, God allowed Job to consider the fact that he could not stand before the power of Satan without God empowering him. Job thought that he was all alone through this ordeal. Indeed, he felt he was alone. Yet this was God's way of saying that he was not alone, because if he were, then he surely would have crumbled before the power of Leviathan and Behemoth. God ends his words to Job without ever telling him the story behind the story. Job was left ignorant about the contest between God and Satan that prompted his whole crisis. Though Job did not know the whole story, God did tell him of his great victory over Leviathan, giving Job assurance for the past, present, and for the future. What comfort does it bring you that God did not give him an answer? I think that's the most puzzling thing about this book. From beginning to end, we see in the very beginning that it's not Job. It's not Job's fault that these things are happening. In fact, God puts Job up and says, "Did you consider my servant Job? He is blameless. He's faithful." And Satan said, "If you let me at him, I'll make him curse you." And so through the whole book, Job's going, "I don't know why this happened." His friends are going, "I know what's happening. You're wicked." And nobody really gets the right answer. And God comes on the scene and doesn't even offer an answer to the question. Oftentimes, I don't know about you, but I have situations in my life that I just don't ever get an answer for. Right? Ultimately, God created this whole earth and everything in it. Satan rebelled against God, and God cast him out of heaven down to the earth. He allowed Satan to tempt Eve in order to test them. He created his children in his likeness. And he gave us the choice to obey him or to disobey him. And we can blame Adam and Eve all we want, but if they hadn't done it and it had been Peter and Joanna in the very beginning, we would have screwed up too. He gave us the choice. I get asked so many times, why did God allow this? Because God wanted us to have a choice. God wanted us to choose whether we're going to love him and obey him or whether we're going to turn our back on him and reject him. We need to remember that nothing in this world is the way that God originally intended it to be. Or at least the way he created it to be. He created it perfect. He created man sinless. I'd like to think that he did not create mosquitoes in the very beginning. That's got to be a curse of God. A curse of, you're right up there with Satan. But he wants us to choose him. He wants us to choose to love him. Isn't that refreshing at some level? We don't have a God that punches a couple of buttons and our robot brains just, yes, I will serve you. Isn't it nice? I mean, sometimes we find ourselves in situations that have either happened to us or they are the result of our own actions, and we would love for God to just deliver us out of it. But what God says is, I am here with you through it. Just because something bad is happening to you doesn't mean that I have all of a sudden fallen asleep or given up on you or abandoned you. Remember, we talked about testing. He uses every trial in our lives to test us. And his purpose in testing is to teach us perseverance. So, well, I'd rather go through life without perseverance, and I disagree. Because the next trial that comes along, you're going to need to persevere. We've got a lot of trials going on in our world right now. Powers from every angle trying to yank our chain and tell us what's truth and what's a lie. And it's almost impossible to know what to believe. I don't know about you, but this is probably the single most time in my life anyway to where there's only some people that I really trust. Most of them are in this room. But the one person that I do trust is the Lord. I know that He created me. He created you. I know He loves me and He loves you. And He came down to this earth 2,000 years ago as a little baby. And it's not just a nice, warm, fuzzy Christmas story. It's great that He came, but He came so that He would die. So that He would die on a cross so we would have not just the chance to not go to hell, but His Spirit, when we give our lives to Him and we are reborn in Him, we have a power in us that will transform our lives. I was sitting across from a young man the other day, and who I am today is all he's ever known. I said, man, if you'd only known me about 20 years ago, you'd be really surprised who I was. How my life was changed. Decisions I was making that was ruining my family. And I finally gave in. Surrendering sounds like a sentence, but surrendering is actually freedom. I surrendered my life to the Lord that day, and I've not been the same ever since. Can I just encourage you with this as we close here? We're going to take communion. I heard these words years ago. As we think about Job, we think about God being God and us being man, looking at our life and our trials and our struggles that we've been through, that we're going through, or that we're about to go through. This is kind of a paraphrase, I believe, of James 1. It says that God will not protect you from what He wants to perfect you through. We are going through a time right now in our world where we're struggling. Where we don't know who to trust, and it looks like everything's coming to a head. Some of our children are experiencing war for the first time in their lives. I think that's what hit me this week the most when Melissa was talking to Joanna about the youth that were just concerned, worried about what this means for the world to be at war. There's so much going on, and it's happening so quickly that we can get overwhelmed and want to check out and want to circumvent God's system on perfecting us and making us complete, ready for every good work. And it's these trials. And the important thing to remember is that He didn't just go to sleep and abandon us. He's there with us. He's always there with us. The Spirit is living in us.